Well, here we go. Welcome to the 4th and Long, episode 6. Going to do things a little differently here. We're going to first start off with the normal flow with recapping week 7 that was, and then we're actually going to go back and look at kind of the highlights on how these divisions have been shaping up over the past 7 weeks. We're approaching the halfway mark for the NFL season, so we figured why not take this opportunity for us to do a little bit of a recap as well. So, as always, you have me, Kamish, and on the phone is Randy. Randy, what do you think tonight's going to hold for us on this podcast? You got some big topics, some good notes.
Yeah, I got a few good ones here. We do like to do things a little different now and again here, and of course, anyone that knows us, different is definitely one way to describe us. So why don't we just roll with that, right?
Yeah, amen. So let's get into it. I think it's your turn to start us off, Randy. Week 7. Week 7. What do you? Who was the best matchup of the week?
Well, we probably agree on this one, mainly because we talked about it in the podcast previous. The big matchup of the juggernauts, the Bears versus global warming. I think we can agree this really did live up to the hype. They were projected to be 111 to 106 for the points. They both beat that. They both got over 120. With global warming pulling out a 129 to 120 victory. We were talking a lot about the running back matchup, and boy, did they ever show up. The two running backs for each side for the Bears put up 30, which is combined, which is pretty good already, and global warming put up 50. So that's 80 points between the four running backs, and for some guys, that's their whole week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You add that to the fact that really only the kickers and defense really did poorly, at least across the board. It was a lot of it was a lot of tit for tat, a lot of the Bears would win the quarterback matchup, but then global warming would win the tight end one, and back and forth they go. And then you add the fact that Monday night and Sunday night football provided 60 combined points in this matchup, so that's quite a bit. That's a quarter of the points on those two games. So, it wasn't over at Sunday 3:00 is kind of the way I'm going with that. You know how I like the late ones.
Yeah, I'll let you. Do you want me to jump in here? You got a few more notes.
I just got a couple more notes, and then I'll let you jump in here.
Sounds good.
Mainly that I was a little worried at the start during the morning game when it was announced that Melvin Gordon would be injured for that game, but sometimes when it's going your way, it's just going your way. Global warming plugged in a running back I like to call Carry On My Wayward Johnson.
I like what you did there.
Yeah. He filled in quite nicely, and the more I thought about that, at least that nickname, the way I say it, is there's actually a couple of connections for Ryan and global warming to that song. I guess first of all, he's got two players on his team that play for the Kansas City Chiefs, right? You see that there, and I guess a lot of you guys kind of know he's got a bit of a reputation in the league. So what's that famous line from that song? Don't you cry no more?
That's right.
He's not crying anymore.
That's right, Ryan. You heard it here. That's an interesting way to look at it, and you're right. We did speak to it last week, and they're my matchup of the week as well. These two teams potentially could meet in the finals. They both have solid rosters, especially at the running back position, like you mentioned. It's the depth here is unreal for both teams. I'm actually surprised Ryan set an alarm, or he just took a shot Saturday night that Gordon wasn't going to play. I had him in another league, and I didn't get up in time to make that happen. But, I have it there too, and like I said, we said it would be great, even without Gordon. Ryan got the job done. Hunt had another huge week. 32 points. He doubled his projections, which is pretty solid.
It's great.
Yeah, exactly. My prediction for that, as we said, would be, I broke it down position-wise, and actually I was 4 out of 6 I got correct. I said Corey would have the better quarterback, Ryan would have the better wide receivers, running back, and tight end, where I gave it back to Corey was the kicker and the defense. And even with Tucker's missed extra point, that would have only put him to 7, and Suckup had 7.5. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Those last two were very close, so you can't be faulted if you're only off by a couple points on them. The big, you were right on most of the big ones, anyways.
yeah, and then just going back to that, I think unfortunately for the Bears, I mean he was holding on to Barkley on Monday night, and he did his projections. I mean 17.4, but just hoping maybe for another TD, and unfortunately. As if you watch the game, I think there was opportunities for Barkley to maybe had 1 or 2 more touchdowns. So you never know there. But yeah, the two Titans met up there, and Ryan walked away with it. So Ryan's starting to climb the charts, and the untouchable Bears are actually human now. They're on an 0-2 losing streak. So we'll see what that brings moving forward. And I got to play him this week, but we can. I'm not sure if we're going to get into that later, but it should be a good tilt this week as well. So, moving on from that to the worst, I got to put. I know he's not listening anymore, but Devil Raiders versus Jägermeisters is my worst matchup of the week.
Okay, I can.
Yeah, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit. The stat lines were nothing to write home about. I feel for you. Particularly because one, you did lose to the guy who was undefeated or winless in our league, but you took a shot on McCoy, who I did drop, and he got hurt and didn't help you out. He only had 0.1 of a point, which is unfortunate because my next point is your other 3 running backs tripled or doubled their projections almost, and you could have plugged and played any one of those, and you would have won this matchup. So that's got to hurt. You're going after the guy you got off the waivers, but it just didn't pan out for you. Beckham finally had a week, and who would have thought that? Hey, you've been trashing him since day one.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's for sure. And yeah, well, it seems like as soon as I trash him, he plays well. So
hey, who knows?
Year and the Giants will just do even worse. So how's that for strategy?
Hey, we post these to YouTube so we can get the links, and maybe he came across it one night and said, "Screw this guy." I don't know, but
I'm sure I'm not the only one, and definitely not the biggest name trash in the last few weeks. He's got a lot of guys on his revenge list, I'm sure.
Oh, and then just a couple more points here. Back to your running back situation. We talked about doubling projections already, or meeting projections. Zeke went down by a third of his projection. Like, he only got a third of his projection, which is, I'm not sure what happened there. Maybe you have more insight if you give a report later on, but I think it's just interesting that the Giant who you trashed finally has a game, and the guy you praise on your team is your pony, and rightfully so, also let you down. It's kind of a double-edged sword there. But congrats to Kelly. He finally got a win, and now let's see if he can string 2 in a row together. But just from a matchup perspective, outside, really, there wasn't much to write home about here.
Oh, yeah, I agree on that. I know I'm trying to forget some of that. I know I've been watching the Monday night game with quite a bit of anxiety, and especially since there was one play when Matt Ryan threw it behind Hooper at the goal line, and man, if he connected with that, it would have been, no doubt, I would have won that, because that's my quarterback and my tight end. But yeah, I didn't like that game either, obviously, for the result. But the game that I actually picked was Man Bear Pig versus Shelly Told Me To. The main reason for this, I mean, it wasn't close for one. They're both sub-500 teams, which I guess technically so was the matchup that you listed now. So there aren't a ton of playoff implications in this, although I know it's early. Anyone can come back, but it's not like, not like the matchup of the week where there are 2 top teams going at it. Man Bear Pig only had 2 players beat their projections, and that's not a good thing. They weren't even projected to do very much. I think his projection was something like 95 points for the whole team, which is, not great. I also noticed, just because it was pretty much a blowout, Shelly Told Me To won almost every category. The only one that member Big beat him on was kicker. And, quarterback, they were kind of close. He beat them by 8 points. Wide receivers was close. Running back it was a 6 point win. Tight ends were close. But the flex and the defense were both amazing blowouts by Shelley Tomiku, 23-1 and 12-4, respectively. When you have that kind of a blowout on two different positions, it's really hard to make up for it. And the fact that this game was never really close, that's that's why I had that down. And then, of course, like I said, there was no. It's not like there were any juggernauts in this one. This was two teams who are either on the lower half of the league or were not exactly going in the right direction. But someone had to win, and Shelley told me to came out with it.
Yeah, no, and I see some of your points there. Sanders finally had a week, didn't he? There, 23 for your flex isn't bad.
Yeah.
Got to be frustrating with Shelley told me too that Julio is only putting up 8 points. He's just I don't get it. Randy, you have Matt Ryan. Why is he not going to Julio? Let's just ask. I'll ask you a quick question. Why is he not getting Julio some touchdown love?
I think it's just because, I think there are just some other options. Either that or it's just bad luck. Like, he doesn't seem to be throwing a fade to him. He's not getting the home run touchdown, so he gets lots of yards, and he's very favorable on third down, at least from what I've seen, watching Matt Ryan as much as I can because he's my quarterback. He seems to go to him in the middle of the field quite well. It's open. Not always Julio. I don't know if they double him. Obviously I have Hooper as my tight end, so I don't mind.
Yeah, there's some interesting things there, but
he was doing better way back when he first came in, and Roddy White was on the other side. So it's not like Julio has always been the only wide receiver. He's been able to share the ball and still get points, but not this year. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, and it's a weapon that I think maybe Selby could have hoped for a few other weeks earlier on, right? And we'll see about that. But we got to keep moving on here. So, player of the week, who are you giving the crown to?
Oh, I got a good one. You might like this one, or maybe you won't like this one just because it kind of goes off the rails a bit. I'm picking the Denver Broncos defense.
I like that. Well, interesting.
And sure, they were playing the lowly Cards, but if you just look at the stats, 3 interceptions, 6 sacks, 2 touchdowns on defense, 32 points from a defense. I mean, that is, and on Thursday night, no less, so it's like you were out of the gate like 30 points ahead, and the only player that played is your defense. I mean, Jake was just smiling, just smiling all week. He couldn't wait for Sunday to come just to see how much he beat him by. And especially if you imagine the best defenses aren't even expected to reach 20 to 25 points. Like, most of the projections are in the 9 to 10 to 11 point range. But you get 30 plus out of a defense. That's just a bonus and a half.
Yeah, no, and I know he was he was sending out some texts, and I know he was pretty pumped about that. Like, to get 30 from a defense is usually unheard of, but it happens once or twice a season. And like you said, it wasn't against the LA Rams. They had the opportunity. They took advantage of their matchup, and he was able to get some points. I mean, he could have not played a defense and still be clueless. But to have that security blanket from your defense position, that's a good way to start off the week. So no, I'm sure he'll like to hear that. For me, I got to give it back to a running back from global warming for Kareem Hunt again. 3 touchdowns, 140 all-purpose yards, and without Gordon really there, you have Connor, you put Ingram in, but as well as I do, Gordon and Hunt are his golden boys. So without the balance with Gordon there, Hunt had to kind of go off to make global warming feel safe with the move, right? So, and he did that, and that ended up propelling him to a win too. I mean, you get 32 points from the running back position. That's again easier to do from a running back as opposed to a defense. but when you can't rely on 15 and 15 or 20 and 20, when the one guy goes off, that definitely helps. So I'm going to give it to Kareem Hunt. I think that matchup was close, like you mentioned, and we did. So to have that the player go off like that in that tight of a matchup is pretty good. So my worst player of the week, I'm going back to you, my friend. Um, I'm going to say Zeke.
Okay, I agree with that. He's a
I wrote here, this guy cost Randy the match! Exclamation point.
mm-hmm.
Only 42 all-purpose yards. This is what I also wrote. What happened? Question mark, question mark. He only had 15 attempts, and the last three games he was averaging about 20 to 24 attempts. So I'm not sure why they went away from that. Did the matchup stymie Zeke? I didn't get to watch the game, but I know it was a close one, and it's just when you have a guy like that, Randy. I mean, I just mentioned Hunt for global warming. When you have a guy that you were able to draft in Zeke, you almost assume you're getting probably 15 to 20 points a week.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just didn't happen for you, and to lose by not that much. I mean, if Zeke does a normal week for you, well, yeah, it was close, but you still walk away with the win. But unfortunately, he didn't get that done for you, so I got to give him the axe this week.
And yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that as well. Like you said, he's supposed to be a main anchor on my team, and it should be pretty safe to say he'll get me 10 points. I shouldn't have to look twice to look at double digits, but uh, I didn't watch the game either. But from what I could tell, just by looking at the stats and so on, is that the Redskins defense just came to play, and you they couldn't get any first downs, and they couldn't get much yardage on first and second downs, which is obvious. If he only gets 40 combined yards, I mean, then he's obviously not getting much on first and second down, which means you're passing on third down, and if you don't get it on third down, then you punt and all this, and it was a low scoring game for the most part, and yeah, that was most of it. I was hoping for that field goal to send it overtime just so Zeke could have another shot to get some points, because it was looking pretty bad there. Um, my bust of the week, however, is another running back, and one I know we've been talking about here, especially lately. That's David Johnson for Clueless.
Oh, well, we did talk about that trade, didn't we?
We did talk about that trade, and I know you had thought that David Johnson wasn't going to do that well, and at least for the first week he didn't. Now, granted, he was playing that tough Broncos defense that we spoke about not too long ago, and but really 7 points from a guy like David Johnson, who again, the reason why Clueless traded for him was because he wanted him to be kind of like what Zeke is for me and what Gurley is for you. He wants him to be a consistent, solid running back that he can count on every week, and 7 points doesn't do it. It's also worth noting that David Johnson hasn't rushed for 75 yards, not even 75 yards this year. He's been very reliant on touchdowns the last few weeks. Now, granted, the schedule is improving for him in the cards. They get San Francisco, Oakland, Green Bay, and Atlanta before the end of the year, so those games will be better. But yeah, that trade's looking pretty bad, at least so far.
Yeah, well, hey, we're only halfway through, and speaking of halfway through, we're gonna try something new. We're gonna talk about our halfway point, minus next week, but we're kind of really at the halfway point fantasy wise because you only play up to week 14, so that's kind of why we're adding this in now.
Right.
So what we're going to do here, Randy, as explained, we're going to recap the NFC division from the current rankings as of today. We're going to go through, just kind of talk quickly about the good, the bad, maybe how they got here, how they could improve. Then we'll focus. Then we'll shift to the AFC, and we'll count down that ladder as well. So maybe what we'll do, Randy, is in the NFC, since I'm in that division, I'll always start with our rankings moving down, and then you can chime in after. And then on the AFC, we'll flip script. So you talk about the team, and then I'll follow up.
Okay, sounds good.
So, well, we get to start with me, I guess. Screaming Beavers first in the NFC, current record 5-2. just behind global warming for most points for. We're having a decent season for points for.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you, a 5 game win streak has definitely propelled my team. I started the year 0-2. Kind of not really sure where that was going to go, and we put up some points, but we didn't get the wins, and say la vie. But 5-2 moving forward currently. I got to give a lot of credit to my team is coming out of Todd Gurley, as I get chirped every week.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll take that, and that's a key piece. And you know what? Brandon Cooks is surprising me actually from the wide receiver position. I didn't think he was going to get the touches he did, but he's definitely getting that long ball, and I'll take that as well. Um, you know me and everybody else. I normally don't take a quarterback super early. I usually end up with maybe a couple guys down the ladder, but last draft I decided to take Breeze maybe a little bit earlier than I normally would, and it's been panning out for me to have a quarterback. He's definitely had good stats for me. He's broken a few records. Unfortunately, we don't get bonus points for records, but maybe we look into that. But the downsides to my team currently are one. I briefly touched on him with you, but LaShawn McCoy was an early draft pick because I was trying to build depth. He definitely let me down, and who knows what I could have gotten with that draft pick had I not taken him.
Right.
And definitely the tight end spot is weak for me. As you know, I had to make a trade with you just to even try to survive in that position. And Vance McDonald, although does get touches, is no Kelsey, Ertz, Olsen, etc. So I do have a weak spot. It's definitely the tight end, but I'm currently first, and I'm gonna say we'll see where this goes. But I have a very tough matchup this week against the Bears, who's looking to rebound off an 0-2 last 2 games. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I agree with that assessment pretty well as well. I'll make just a quick note. I know you had briefly mentioned it, but your 2 losses, you put up 134 and 128 points in those losses. So definitely not out of the realm of possibility. You could have been 7-0, and we could have been talking about you instead of Corey about being the guy to chase. You do have a tough schedule going into the last bit. Not only do you get the Bears, but you get global warming down the stretch too. So you got some pretty tough matchups. But you're in the tough division, so that's kind of where that goes. As far as your weaknesses on the tight end position as well, I gave you Cameron Brate, who was doing pretty good when I had him. I don't think he's panned out for you so far. I think he's a very touchdown heavy or is it touchdown reliant tight end.
Yeah.
But he does get enough targets, and that's why I saw value in him to pick him up off waivers, and I hope he gets enough targets, at least enough targets to make you think about choosing either him or McDonald. At least you've got someone who's going to catch the ball and someone who's going to get to some points, because I think there was one tight end, Clay, I think it was, who got his own or minus points. I can't remember who it was that had him, but their position is definitely very thin. And anytime you get someone that gets you more than 5 points, you can call that as a good tight end. At least it doesn't cost you.
Oh, for sure. So yeah, that's a report on them. So moving down the ladder, the Bears, they're second in the NFC, but they're third overall in the league. They started 5-0, and now they're 0-2. So we kind of did a little flip there, right? How we got both of our records to 5-2. Running back has to. You got to like the depth here, but I think Dalvin Cook is a little bit of a weak spot for him. I know he was a keeper. But he hasn't really panned out to the way, because a lot of the times you see Cook on the bench or maybe a plug and play for the flex because he's going with Kamara and his first overall pick, which is my next point, Saquon Barkley, which obviously was a must pick, and that has panned out, so kudos for him for being in that draft position. Another interesting area I find that is started off hot for him but has kind of faltered lately is his defense. Chicago was flying out the gate on a one-man wrecking crew in Khalil Mack, but lately I'm not sure if it's their schedule or if it's just, they're coming back down to reality, but they are allowing a fair bit of points each game they play, and that's costing him, to become sub-projected points. But he's definitely still a threat, and we'll see what this week pans out.
Well, and especially if you're thinking about, it's getting to that time of year where the weather in Chicago is really cold and really windy, so that helps the defense out. But apparently didn't make any difference to Tom Brady and the Patriots. They still put up lots of points against them. And yeah, I my knowledge is there aren't any really big injuries on the defense, so I'm expecting them to pull it back together. Perhaps it was part of the schedule. I guess the other thing I can mention just about, obviously we spoke about the best 1-2 running back combo in the league. The supporting cast doesn't impress me nearly as much as those two now maybe Kamara and Barkley are setting the bar a little too high for that, but the rest of the team just doesn't seem to bounce off the page at me. If one of those guys takes a week off, say in the playoffs or late in the season, it could be pretty rough. They might not be able to keep up with some of the higher ones. Like, we're starting to see some weaknesses. I believe you're even projected to beat him this week. So can you imagine after that 5-0 start if he loses 3 in a row?
Yeah, I'm projected to currently beat him by 15 points, but hey, that's a player going above or a player going below, so it's still close.
That's right.
Third, we like to talk about him, global warming, but he's 4th overall. He's starting to warm up. You see what I did there?
Yeah.
He's on a 3-game win streak, and this team to me is very scary. They have the most points for in the league, but did you know they also have the most points against, which I find very interesting. So I'm not sure how that's really happening. Just happens to be in really tight, high matchups, I guess. In my opinion, he has the best running back group out there. But with Bell coming back this week, so we say. I know he has Ingram, but Connor's been quite the workhorse for him. Does Bell affect Connor and therefore affect global warming's flex player, if you will? We'll see how that pans out. I think Ryan's weakest spot is the quarterback position. I just don't think he can trust Matt Stafford to deliver a 33 plus game. I don't think Stafford's going to get over that threshold this year, and sometimes you need your quarterback to go off. But he's got options, and I think he's looking to repeat, and I think he's setting himself up. And interestingly enough, Ryan is taking full advantage of the 2 moves a week. We've finished week 7, and he has 14 moves that he used. So he's very active on the waiver wire, always looking to better the team. So I like what I see here with him.
Yeah, I agree. He has I just mentioned that the Bears had the deepest 1-2 combo at running back, but global warming has the best 1 through 3 or 4, however many running backs he has. He has the best overall running back core in the league, and obviously James Conner is a big part of that. At least regards to your question about Le'Veon Bell, just as a quick answer, I don't think it'll affect him at first, because I think the longer Bell drags out this holdout, the more the coaching staff and the offensive play calling will just kind of say, screw you. Connor still has the hot hand. He hasn't shown any signs of slowing down, so we'll just keep feeding him and give you that excuse to keep beating him. So I think he'll still be, and even if they put Bell in the game, do you really think they're going to put Bell in at on the 1 yard line? Say if it's garbage time and they're well ahead, they're not going to give him any favors.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and more to your point, you also made about him getting very little help from his opponents. Only one time this season has an opponent scored less than 100 points against him. So he's always up against it, and that's why he's only a game above 500, even though he has the highest scoring team and he has all these great players on it. Everybody shows up to play him, it seems. So if that happens to even itself out in the second half of the season and players start gifting him games, look out. He's going to be pretty close to unstoppable.
Yeah, I think so too. So moving down the ladder here, we got number 4 in the NFC, but 5th overall. Dylan and the bottom feeders. They're just coming off a loss. I think they have a respectable 4-3 record, especially in the NFC division. I mean, you got to praise Jesus for Patrick Mahomes. Otherwise, I think this 4-3 could be way worse. Maybe 2-5. I just don't know. Like, I didn't predict Mahomes to do what he did. Maybe Dylan obviously knew something, but I mean, when your quarterback is almost getting 40 points a week, that takes pressures off positions like flex, tight end, kicker. You know what I mean? So he's almost getting you points where other positions could falter and still be in a position to win. We did talk about it, and we're not going to go into depth, but I just have a note here because we're at the halfway. He did trade away a former first overall, and we're going to see how that trade plays out on his half. His one area that could haunt him is his defense. I think is going to be a plug and play. I think he'll hit waivers just to see where the matchups go and what's available. Currently 5th overall. I think we got to see how this one shakes out. I'm not sure. I think he'll squeak in. I'm just not sure from 5 through 8 where he'll finish.
Yeah, and it's a very positive thing for him that the Chiefs and Mahomes are already through their bye week, so he never has to worry about never starting Mahomes, because like you said, he gets at least a third to a half of his team's points most weeks, and he doesn't seem to be slowing down. Like it was week 2 or 3 or something like that. At the podcast, I said he might slow down. I said he doesn't show any signs of slowing down. It's pretty easy to call he'll be this way all year. Even against tough defenses, he doesn't seem to do anything wrong. So, which, as you mentioned, is vital to him because he's lacking a supporting cast of any kind on that team.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Moving down, so we don't take up too much time. The 5th in the NFC is Shelley told me to, and currently 9th ranked. So he's just on the outside looking in with a 3-4. You got to feel for this guy that Fournette is basically not even playing this year. What a terrible shakedown for running back position. Because if you look at his roster, I have a note here that is a big hole on this team, and one that Fournette could have taken a bit of pressure off. But we just talked about it, Randy, and we broke it down a little bit. But I have a note here: Julio needs touchdowns.
Yeah.
And that was also where he's letting them down. 812 yards with 0 touchdowns.
Yeah.
That's just, I don't get that. And then you look at his other big guy, Evans. Only 3 touchdowns. He usually has a fair bit of touchdowns as well, and just seems to be having an on pace for maybe 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. I mean, that's decent for maybe somebody like Tyler Lockett on his team, who has 5 touchdowns and half the yards. So his wide receiver core, I think, is not bad. I think there's some options there. And what a surprise find in Eric Ebram. Like, who would have thought that guy would come out of somewhere? I mean, the guy's got 6 touchdowns, and Andrew Luck is back, and man, is he swinging it into him. And another falter here, although I think still don't take them lightly, is Minnesota's defense. I think fantasy point wise has let him down a few times. Just with the amount of points.
Here.
Yeah, and they don't have it easy this week. They got New Orleans Sunday night, which is going to be a great game. But that's a little recap on them.
Yeah, and kind of your point, it's especially terrible with Fournette. But the way he was injured, like if he just gets injured and gets put on IR week 1. Then you can try to deal with it and you can go ahead and scrap it for this year. But just the way he was hurt for a couple weeks, he came back for a game, got hurt, and he's gone again. And, is he going to come back on the bye week and this and that? They're kind of dragging it along, and now it looks like he's out for a while. And then they picked up Carlos Hyde, so, when is he coming back? Are they going to be safe with him? There's a lot of questions about that, and it's costing him for sure the first half of the season. As far as his wins and losses, he's really hot and cold. He'll get 120, 130 points one week and then 80 the next. But that goes to with not having that solid guy like Leonard Fournette in there, where the receivers, well, if Julio has a good game on yardage, they do well, but but again, no touchdowns to put you over the top. Two of his three wins, I noticed just by looking at his schedule, two of his three wins were pretty much gifted to him by lack of opposition. So, you know, you had kind of made the point it could be a lot worse. Yeah, 3-4 and kind of hanging in there. He's hoping that his players kind of become more consistent for him.
Oh, for sure. And rounding out the sixth position in the NFC and 10th overall in our league is our boy from the West Coast, Jerry Man Bearpig. I think he's got an interesting dilemma here. There's only 4 points that separate a guy like Tom Brady from Jared Goff. And their stat lines are pretty equal here, so we'll see how he plugs and plays with that. Capital letters here, 4 letters, BELL. What a letdown and what a disappointment from a keeper standpoint, because I think a guy like that, and you know he would be a beast fantasy wise if this whole contract thing wasn't an issue. Jerry could be different than 2 and 5 for sure. I think his running backs are weak because also Bell is not there. But yeah, even with Bell, Crowell's not doing terrible. But other than that, there isn't much depth there in that position. And I have a note, thank goodness, for Crowell because I think things could be a lot worse here.
Yeah.
I just think Jerry needs to probably start focusing on trading and preparing for the off season because I just don't think things are going to get better here. I think they're going to get worse faster. Jimmy Graham is an absolute bust from a tight end, and I think that's an opportunity that if somebody likes him, they could maybe trade him for further down in a tight end position. But yeah, he's allowing the second most points in our league. So, yeah, tough season for the Man Bear Pig.
Yeah, I agree. His only real consistent players are Brady or Goff, whichever one he puts in. Zerline and Hopkins are really the only ones worth noting. Again, Bell not playing really puts a stink in his whole strategy because I'm sure he was relying on him to be a cog. He wasn't planning on drafting a running back early in the draft because you know, with Bell in your lineup every no week, you don't need one. You need to make improvements elsewhere. But when he's not in, it really puts a damper on what he can do. Trades might be available, and depending on where Bell goes at the end of the year, once his time with Pittsburgh is done, Jerry might have to think about whether to even keep Bell or not, depending on where he goes. I should think that he'll dominate anywhere he goes, but you never know.
Yeah, no. So that's a breakdown of the NFC. So Randy, I'll let you lead us through the AFC, and I'll just chime in after you're done on each team.
All right, sounds good. So leading the AFC at 4-2 is Clueless, and they, much like the Bears, got off to a hot start. They were always chasing the Bears in the standings, always only one game behind. So a really good hot start, a really good division record too. I believe they're 4-1 in the division, so that helps a lot because, as you know, as I'm sure most guys have figured out, the schedule is very heavy on your own division this year. That's just the way it came out.
Yeah.
Again, the big trade for David Johnson still on the fence as to whether it's good, or bad. It hasn't been paying out yet, but he's hoping that it does because you know, with the Bears now losing 2 in a row, he kind of had his chance to take over the league, but now you're roaring in and global warming's right behind him. So he's got to turn this ship around right now if he wants to keep up with you guys and kind of consider himself a contender.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's second ranked overall just because of, I think, because of a division leader. But I know he wasn't happy with his performance last year, so he has to be, happy from the standpoint that he's definitely rebounded. You know, you talk about fantasy quarterbacks. Although they rank him high every year, I just don't trust him. Outside of his injury years, okay. But Andrew Luck, to come back and have 20 touchdown passes already, that's pretty sweet. So I think he's found a nice, reliable fantasy quarterback. And the Colts seem to be in like 40-point games every week. I don't understand what's going on there, but. One of his weapons from the wide receiver is Michael Thomas, and I know he curses him, and he's kind of let him down a bit, especially with that high-powered New Orleans offense. But he's definitely a threat and a guy you can't not play. We talked about that trade a few times. I think that's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out for him. But more of a disappointment from a guy he's had all along is Jordan Howard. Two touchdowns, and some weeks he doesn't even get like 10 points. So from your RB2, let's call him, that's such a letdown. But I think this team is one that can sneak up on you if you don't pay attention to them.
Yeah, and especially if like we say, David Johnson picks up his game and becomes more consistent, gets a few touchdowns and gets a few more yards a game, then yeah, he'll definitely be dangerous. Number 2 in the AFC at a 4-3 record is Old Dirty Bastards, and just like the clueless above him, has a good division record at 4-1. Looks pretty good that way. I guess you can say 2 of his four wins were gifted to him, and almost 3 of the wins, which of course, being in this division, we've got a couple of weak links and certainly a couple of more teams that are capable of having weak games. That, of course, myself included in that one as well. It's not the most dangerous lineup, but they do well enough to get you the wins. Wentz being hurt at the beginning of the year hasn't really picked up where he left off. I mean, he's still solid, but he's not lighting any lamps out here.
No, for sure. He last year was his first year in fantasy football, as we all know. So to come out and not make the playoffs last year, to putting yourself in a playoff position is definitely a step in the right direction. His running backs are kind of on the weaker end, but it doesn't help. You can't fault him that Freeman's on the IR, right? I think that was a good pick when he took him. But it's just, hey, shit happens, and that's tough, and you got to move on. But I think Coleman, Atlanta, I don't get why they're not going to him, too, when they're in the red zone. If Julio's not going to catch it, why don't they just plug with Coleman? That's what they did with Freeman. So we'll see where that happens. A.J. Green's having himself a better year. That Cincinnati offense is starting to find their groove as well. But Big Ben, I think, has been clutch for him yardage-wise. He's got 12 touchdowns. Ben's having himself quite the season as well. There's a potential here, but we'll see. I'm not sure with Yeldon because Fournette's out, but with Hyde coming over, is that going to hurt Yeldon's production a little bit, or do you think they're going to share maybe like 60-40, or how do you think that's going to work out?
I guess it depends on how the practice week goes. I imagine they'll probably start off with Yeldon getting the higher share of the touches, but again, when you have a running back by committee like that, or a timeshare or anything like that, often the main guy gets the ball all the way down the field, and then he gets pulled off in the red zone because he's tired from running so much, and then they put in the second guy, and he might vulture some touchdowns, and then it's not always flip it around, although they may flip, Hyde gets one series, Yeldon gets another, sort of like that. They may flip that around just because Hyde, at least, is considered a somewhat top tier, or at least a very competent back. So it's not like they're bringing in some guy that's too old, although, some may argue that, but he's playing pretty well this year, or some young kid to come in. They will share it pretty evenly.
Yeah, and just one final point there. You talked about how he was kind of gifted some wins. Unfortunately, he was kind of screwed out of some losses too. If we remember, leading into Monday nights, Jake was usually on the chat praying for Pittsburgh to kind of do something. Realistically, there was a potential there that he could be 6-1. Because I remember there was 2 weeks for sure that I think he was only off by a couple plays, but needless to say, he's 4-3. So who's next?
And up next at third place is Texas Walker Rangers, also a 4-3 record. This team looks all right. I mean, 2 elite quarterbacks to build around, unfortunately, you can only play one at a time. The good news is you shouldn't get any bad weeks, although I think Kirk Cousins had one bad week, but, we've kind of been making fun of, he always manages to start the wrong one, but he's still above 500. The supporting cast is not the best, as we've mentioned as well before, and with a lot of these guys kind of in the middle of the pack, you'll see that. It's kind of thing. There was a big worry, especially early on, about Aaron Rodgers' leg injury. Didn't really affect his fantasy value. We're still kind of waiting to see if if it gets any better. He certainly has to be in a lot of shootouts because he's not on a team with a good defense. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's another really tough one to gauge. Kind of those middle of the pack guys. They don't really put any fear into anyone. Just because they don't have that many big names, like the running backs aren't that impressive. Wide receivers, well, they're not playing that well this year either.
Yeah, I mean, I have the Cody, the man of the 3 quarterback auto draft, because he did have Bortles too. You remember? But yeah, he's got a situation which, I mean, again, you could view it as you can't go wrong with either one you start. You've given yourself some good quarterbacks to kind of match up based on who you think is more appropriate. So he has to feel good in that, but like you say, you can only play one. I think he has the best waiver pickup of the entire season so far is Calvin Ridley for the Falcons.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a great acquisition who's gotten him 6 touchdowns. His wide receiver core is pretty deep. No real big names outside of probably Diggs is more household known or Juju. But I think there's a lot of options to move there, and he's got to feel good with that. And actually, all his wide receivers have actually caught over 300 yards.
Mm-hmm.
So they're getting looks, but the defense and the running back is a little soft on this team. He's 7th overall, just above you. We're going to see if they can hang on to it, but we have a few more weeks to play here.
That's right. Next on the line, as you just mentioned, is myself, Jägermeister's 4th place in the AFC with a 3-4 record. Okay, where to begin for this one? We mentioned before, I feel I have an elite running back, although he didn't play like one this past week, as he was your bust of the week. And I have an elite wide receiver, Adam Thielen, which, I don't think anyone would be complaining about his performance. Even when Minnesota has a bad week, he managed to get yardage and a touchdown. With that as a starting point, I would think that I would be in pretty good shape. My Houston defense at least is supposed to be a good defense, and they've been picking it up quite a bit lately. But they didn't do me any favors at the beginning of the year. And the big question mark for me, who I've been either praising or condemning it every other week, seems to be Matt Ryan. Which one shows up? Does the dominant Matt Ryan shows up, or does the crappy Matt Ryan shows up? That seems to get sacked all the time. I mean, he seems to be, maybe it's just because he's my quarterback and I cringe every time he gets that because that's points off the board. But man, he seems to get sacked so easily and so often. I'm always cringing at that thought, and it's kind of a shame because last week he did what he did and got me that record-setting win, and then now this past week here. I know Zeke kind of didn't do me any favors on it either, but Matt Ryan had more than enough opportunity to get me the win, and he failed to do so.
Yeah, I mean you're in the caboose of the playoff teams here, but you're in if it happened tomorrow. So you position yourself accordingly. I don't understand how you're 3-4 and you average 107 a week. Yeah, that to me is an interesting scenario, but hey, weirder things have happened, I guess. I think Ryan is having that potential MVP-like season. We'll just have to see how the rest of their season goes too. Thielen, like you mentioned, I gotta give Cousins some credit. I was not really high up on him, but he's able to find these guys, and Thielen seems to I think Thielen is his go-to And
Yeah.
you're right. If you offered me a trade for Thielen, I would like to have him. I think he's one of the better wide receivers in the league. And I think I just said the other day watching the game, he's kind of underrated from everybody's perspective. You don't really hear his name tossed out with guys like Beckham, Julio, and all those. But Thielen
Yeah.
is having a better year than both those guys, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. Woods is having himself a decent year as well for you.
Yeah.
You only have three wide receivers on your team, and they've all received over 500 yards.
Yeah. I'm very happy with my receiving core on that end of it.
Yeah, so we'll see where how that shakes down for you. Your running back scenario, on the other hand, is a little different. You have
Yeah.
more running backs, and outside of Zeke, if you didn't have Zeke, your running back situation would be tough to evaluate because I don't think there's anything spectacular that's jumping off the paper. But options are there. You just never know who's going to come and play on this team, which has got to be frustrating
Oh, yeah.
from an owner standpoint. But pieces are there, and you never know. But there's potential that I think hover around that sixth to eighth position.
Yeah, and yeah, like I feel that I've got enough consistency in my lineup to hold on to a playoff spot. I'd like to move up because I really don't want to play any of you big contenders, the big three there. I don't want to play any of you guys in the first round if I can help it. But
Yeah.
moving on to the fifth place in the AFC, the Misfits at 2-5. Unfortunately, we've been talking about these two guys at the bottom quite a bit for all the wrong reasons. At the very least, Deshaun Watson is continuing where he left off last year for the most part, continuing his good play. He has a few bad games now and again, but at least he's not a flash in the pan. He's beginning to prove that. So that's a good young quarterback that Nigel can build around, and there's going to be a lot of building around it. He is way too thin in too many spots. Might be interesting to see if Amari Cooper starts lighting it up. I mean, he's pretty much instantly slotted in as the number one wide receiver in Dallas now. Maybe that's just what Dak needs to get, to get rolling, and maybe just what Zeke needs to finally have another option, so they don't just stack the whole team in the box and try to stop the run all day. I'm obviously hoping my Cowboys. I know I said from the beginning that they were down on wide receivers and didn't have much receiving power. So hopefully this plays out well for him. Hopefully this makes Amari Cooper a much better fantasy option for Nigel as well.
Yeah, and I'm not going to repeat it because I got that as a point here for that team. So, like you said, we'll wait and see what Cooper does in Dallas. We know Misfits has the fewest points in the league, only averaging 75 points a matchup, and that's not going to win you too many. I think to even contend for the potential of a low round win, you got to be above 90. So
Yeah.
he's quite far behind in that gap. I think his running backs tough to hear, but I think his running back core is the worst in the league. Outside of his recent pickup with Lindsey, I don't think there's any options there that are to even be remotely excited about. His QB situation is not bad, but you said you don't like the fact that Matt Ryan gets sacked all the time. Well, Nigel's Watson has 6 more sacks than Ryan at 26 sacks. So
Yeah.
that's you're losing points every time you get sacked. So something to think about there.
Right.
But I think if we're to evaluate, I think Nigel again. I think he should be looking to trade out some options and build draft picks for next year, because if he doesn't, he's just going to be a middle of the round draft pick guy next year. I just don't see this team turning around, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And we'll start with the bottom of the barrel here now. Sixth in the AFC and bottom of the entire league. The Devil Raiders at 1-6. Yes, that one win, and yes, it came against me. Yes, I know the shame of it all. Kelly and the Devil Raiders. Some real positives. That Cooper Kupp, man, he's playing really good, and then you got the old man AP having a bounce back year in Washington. not lighting up like he used to, but certainly is a pleasant surprise, and especially when you consider that Beast Mode is hurt now, and he was certainly very serviceable for Kelly in the first half of the season. I think this team is better than the 1-6 indicates. We've mentioned this before on the podcast, I believe. He's had plenty of bad luck some weeks, but he's also had a couple of busts out there. Gronk being a very big one. I may as well call him David Carr. He's playing like it. Derek Carr is the guy who's also a bust, who's no longer on his team, was picked up by me, and is now no longer on my team, especially since they lost Cooper to trade. Who's he going to throw to now?
What can be said that hasn't already been said about the Devil Raiders.
I hate dragging his team through the mud, but at 1-6, that's what you get.
Yeah, and speaking of 1-6, the old Dirty Bastards last year were also 1-6 by this point. We've never had an 0-7 team, so just to say, next year if you're the team at 0-6, you're probably going to win. But Gronk and Beckham were his.
This league, if never give up till week 7 at least.
Yeah, and Gronk and Nelson were his keepers, and they let him down. And then he's in a position to draft a guy like Beckham. And prior to the season, you could say what you want about the Giants, but things were looking better than what the previous year transpired. But they seem to just be circling that never-ending drain in the Big Apple there. But you're right, AP is a neat addition. But I find, though, he's been slowing down over the last couple weeks here. He had that 1 or 2 good weeks, and now he seems to be kind of not really in transition there. But yeah, you're right. Like, some of the guys on his team just aren't coming to play when it matters for him, and unfortunately, that puts him in that 1-6. But I'm going to call it here. I think time has run out on this team, and I know I spoke to him at work that I think it's time to start thinking of some trades because deadline is coming up. And if you're in this position where you don't think you're going to be in, he does have pieces that guys would be interested in. Let's be honest. You mentioned Cooper Kupp even for a late round draft pick. Gronkowski, of course, you'd want good draft picks or another keeper. Guys like Beckham, that's probably it. But there are options to move and get yourself some draft picks here because let's be honest, if he doesn't remove out of the 12th position, he's 8th pick overall, and when you lose and you get rid of guys, you need to get higher up than that. So so that kind of summarizes the AFC. So you know what, I think we went a little longer than anticipated here, so I think some of those predictions will have to wait for another time. But just quickly, maybe before we sign off here, NFL wise, what game are you interested in if you had any docked up here?
Well, my big one, I think you're probably thinking the same thing, is the Saints and the Vikings. A rematch of that Minneapolis Miracle, but with a better Minneapolis quarterback. So hopefully the game will be even better than that one. And that one was a classic back then too. So looking forward to that one.
That's what I got on the watch list as well. I mean, Breeze being my fantasy quarterback, I just hope Minnesota doesn't finally come to play and put me in a position because I need those points. But we're gonna be coming down to Sunday night here because I know he has Kamara as well. So we'll see how this plays out. But anything else you want to add or anything before we kind of sign off here?
Are you looking to get a little revenge on Corey there for week 1? He's the one after all week 1 that gave you a loss when you put up 138 points. So I think you've been waiting on this matchup all season, it seems.
Well, this will be an interesting one. You're right. He did give me the first loss. We chatted back and forth, but you got to commend a guy who beats you when you put up your own 134. So we'll see how this week plays out here. I mean, things have shifted since week 1. But both teams, I think, are looking in position to have good weeks. It's just a matter of how it shakes down here. So he has Cam Newton, yeah. So if he plays him, he's playing Baltimore. So that'll be an interesting matchup as well. But we'll go from there. So thanks for listening. We'll get it posted probably tomorrow. And next week we're going to do some. Randy, why don't you tell them what we're going to do here quickly before we sign off? And what you kind of came up with?
Well, we're just going to kind of start a little bit of a playoff stretch run. We're just going to go over some of how guys are going to be looking going into the playoffs, and obviously we're starting to get a little bit in crunch time, being in the second half of the season. So yeah, we're just going to go through. We've got some big threats. We're going to go over some of our contenders, some of the dark horses or wild cards, as it were, and then maybe some of the playoff question marks. We're going to at least take a look at where we're at that point. Maybe the playoff picture will be a little clear by next week, but maybe it'll be pretty muddy. So we'll just kind of look into something like that. We'll start talking playoffs.
Playoffs?
Playoffs.
All right. Well, that's it for that, and we'll chat with you guys next week. Take care.
See you guys.